Welcome to the homework questions screencast for Reform of Tsarism, Agriculture, Industry, and Naval. So what we're going to be looking at here is the Reform of Tsarism, the agriculture before the reforms, agricultural after the reforms, how successful was Stolypin, industry and naval changes, and then finally the questions, which are 1, 2, and 3. You'll notice in questions 2 and 3 that you're going to be asked to fill in some categories under some headings, and that should be heading 1 to 3 things under each category. Now let's take a look at the document. Agricultural reforms. Stolypin planned important changes in the countryside. Much of the violence in 1905, the revolution, had been carried out by peasants, and they had a lot of land hunger. To prevent another revolution in the future, some of their demands would have to be met. However, Stolypin had another reason for introducing reforms. He wanted to turn Russia into a modern industrial country. For this to happen, Russian agriculture would have to become more efficient to produce the extra food which would be needed by the increasing numbers of industrial workers. The Tsar had abolished the redemption payments, and this undoubtedly helped to reduce the anger of the peasants, many of whom were no longer able to keep up their payments and so were afraid of losing their land. Over the next couple of years, Stolypin introduced a series of measures which allowed the peasants to leave the mer, or the land. And remember, this was an open field system where people worked communally, and everyone had got a share of the best and the worst land. However, the system was very inefficient. You wasted time traveling between strips. Everyone had to grow the same crop in every field. Strips were too small to encourage the ambitious peasant to buy machinery. Most of the people still used a wooden plow, not even an iron plow or steel. Few animals were kept, so without manure to fertilize the land, the mer used a rotation system. Some of the fields were left fallow, or they didn't grow each year, and so produced no food at all. And the fallow might be 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 years. Stolypin hoped that if the peasants left the mer, they would buy strips of land. If some peasants left, they would buy the strips of land. That would allow others to buy the strips of land around them and create efficient modern farms which would produce more food per hectare. And these rich peasants or kulaks would want to spend their new wealth on consumer goods which would help the factory system. If you see here, this is a painting called The Mowers by Dov, painted in 1887, and the picture shows the Russian peasants working their fields. You'll notice in the picture there's a lack of machinery. There's also a lack of they're working with wheat here, it looks like. There's also a lack of modern equipment and definitely no fences, and they're all working communally. Now, if we take a look at what this looked like in practice, we can see. So here originally is what we would have seen. These are the peasant homes here, the peasant's home. These are the strips of land belonging to the peasants, and there's their homes. The lord is over here. Now, what Stolypin wanted to have happen was that peasants would be able to start buying land. So this might be owned. These are blocks of land. And here we can start to see strips have been bought by wealthier peasants, but not consolidated. So this peasant here, you can see this color, has bought this land, this land, this land, and this land, and this land, and owns it. What Stolypin wanted to start seeing is what's happening here, where peasants bought blocks of land with their house, blocks of land at their house, and could start farming more like you'd see in Canada today or in England at the time. And let's see if he was successful. Did he succeed? Here we can see the percentage of peasants who left the mer by 1914, 25%. Percentage of strip land which had been consolidated, which means brought together or brought together. 10% of the land by 1916, and 25% of the peasants had left the mer. That means moving to the cities where they could be employed as factory workers. And here we see, from a British school textbook in 1986, millions of peasants bought their own land and set about creating new, efficient farms. We can see that's the view, but here we can see that only 10% of the land had been consolidated. The questions you're going to be looking at are here, questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 3B and 4. You'll be answering those. And in addition, you'll be answering the questions on this page, which are questions 1, 2, and 3. Let's take a look now. First of all, I want to direct your attention to this graph, which is a bar chart of strikes in Russia from 1910 to 1913. And we can see that there's a disturbing trend that the strikes are increasing. In terms of industry, Russia had made dramatic improvements. There had been rapid industrialization, which produced a middle-class bourgeoisie, or middle-class owners, but they had no say in how their country was ruled. They'd hoped to have a say in the Duma, but this had been denied them. And remember that the workers had been forced to work in appalling conditions and to live in appalling conditions, and the policy designed to make Russia successful also produced much of the discontent which led to the Revolution of 1905. And while the Tsar and Stolypin hoped to buy the support of the bourgeoisie through the creation of the Duma, nothing was done to improve the conditions of the industrial workers, or the proletariat. When, in 1912, workers at the Lena goldfields in Siberia went on strike for better wages and conditions, troops were sent in, and 270 workers were killed and another 250 injured. In terms of naval reform, Russia was a great power, and great powers are supposed to be able to defeat smaller powers. Yet Russia had failed to do this in the Japanese War of 1904 and 1905. Instead, they'd been humiliated. Far more power was therefore given in a single man, the naval minister, who worked closely with the Duma. Together they drew up a plan to build modern battleships, which would have made Russia the third greatest naval power in the world by 1931. However, Russia lacked the money to do this quickly at a time that two of the great powers, Britain and Germany, were engaged in a naval arms race with the dreadnoughts, which was producing huge battleships. So, here are the questions you need to complete, and what you need to consider, of course, is what was the agriculture before the reforms, agricultural after, and then the questions 1, 2, 3 on page 21, as well as questions the questions 1 to 4 on page 20. There we go. That ends the screencast.